forming a panel. Dr. Sabena Jameel, Dr. Major Scott Parsons, and Professor David Bogle. And I will introduce each of those in turn before they speak. As you will have just noticed, there's just been a message flash up on your screen. We are recording today's webinar, and we will be posting it online, both on our Jubilee Centre YouTube channel and on our webinars page on our website, hopefully tomorrow, but if not, then as soon as possible after the webinar, once we've cropped it and made it suitable to go online. So getting underway this evening, as much as for many of you who do know about the Jubilee Centre, and for those of you who don't, the Jubilee Centre is a research centre based in the School of Education at the University of Birmingham. We research theories and applications of character and character education in schools, in the training of professionals, in professional workplaces, and in the community. And virtues in the professions has been a big theme of our work since 2012. We have looked at individual professions, collecting data from entry-level trainees, from entry-level, from those graduating, their undergraduate and postgraduate courses entering the profession, and then those with some amount of experience of working in those professions. The professions that we have looked at in detail have been teaching, medicine, law, nursing, business and finance, the British Army, and we've got a new project which began in January, which is looking at police services across England and Wales. As well as looking at professions in isolation, we've also looked to integrate the data that we have collected, both through surveys and interviews, which has drawn pictures, allowed us to view the profiles of professionals and in-service and pre-service professionals and their attitudes towards character and virtues. A lot of this work is online. My colleagues will be posting links in the chat throughout this evening to the place of our work, but I signpost you to one particular finding where we were able to identify profiles of professionals based on how they ranked virtues. They were given a list of 24 character virtues using the Values in Action survey as a tried and tested measure, and asked to rank what they saw as being the most important to them personally and to the ideal professional in their particular profession. We came up with 4 character profiles: those who identified and valued intellectual virtues more than any other, those identified and valued moral virtues more than any other, those that identified both moral and intellectual virtues fairly equally, and those that valued neither particularly strongly. And what we found across the professions were that those profiles were in place across each profession. They weren't distinct to any particular profession. However, what we did find was that those working in nursing in particular and teaching in particular were those that would value the moral virtues and the intellectual virtues more, and those that worked in the law valued the virtues the least. Now, that is not to say that lawyers are without virtue. I am married to one, so I definitely cannot get away with saying that. But in comparison with one another, there were some distinct differences, and these were statistically significant. You can find these in the reports that are on our Virtues in the Professions website, webpage. Turning to this evening then, and we have 3 speakers who are distinguished in each of their professions, and hopefully will provide a lot of insight into the place of character and virtue in each of those professions, in the professions of medicine, the military, and engineering. I'll introduce first Dr. Sabena Jameel, who we are very pleased to be very familiar with in the Jubilee Centre as a PhD student of the Jubilee Centre. But Dr. Sabena Jameel is a clinical academic. She is Senior Clinical Lecturer in Medical Professionalism at the University of Birmingham, Academic Quality Lead for that medical school in Birmingham, and also Senior Tutor for Personal Academic Tutor System. Sabena is a qualified doctor and a GP, and has a lot to say around wisdom and phronesis in the medical profession. Sabena has just said, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, Sabena, that you're in the final stages of your PhD studies and about to submit. So I think we'll all be very, very interested to read that thesis hopefully when it passes in due course in not too distant future. But handing over first to speak, Dr. Sabena Jameel.
Okay, thank you. So I've been given a few minutes to answer the question, what is the place of character and virtue in medicine? Now, I just want to say at the outset that character and virtue is developed even before people join medical school at the age of 18. And those formative years of developing character and virtue are absolutely critical. So when I speak, I'm not underestimating the importance of that. What I wanted to start with is maybe a familiar scenario that I'm sure you've heard in chat within your family or even in the workplace. I want to talk about a family doctor called Dr. Gold. Dr. Gold did everything medically correct regarding diagnosis and treatment of a condition for Mrs. B. All the guidelines were followed, but Mrs. B still complained. Why did she complain? She claimed the doctor was dismissive, uncaring, preoccupied, didn't really listen, and she states that he didn't really treat her as a person. So you can see there, it wasn't necessarily the knowledge and the treating the condition that went wrong there. There was something else. And we know that trust is absolutely central to being a doctor. And some have said, and my role is in professionalism, that professionalism in medicine is a trust generating promise. So you can see, think about it. What makes you trust somebody and how does that happen? It isn't just following a textbook. It isn't just following guidelines. It's something else. And this is why talking about character and virtue in medicine absolutely fascinates me. I just wanted to give you a little bit of background. Aidan's already given you some background, but I'm a GP, so that's a family medicine practitioner. And I've been doing that for over 20 years in inner city Birmingham. I spent 15 years working in postgraduate medical education, so that's looking after people after they've finished medical school until they finish their specialty training. So that can go on until they're over the age of 30, and I'm still studying and I'm a lot older than that as well. So postgraduate medical education continues. More recently, I moved to Birmingham University where I'm involved in undergraduate medical education. So medicine in this country is from the age of usually 18 to about 23, and then they begin working as a junior doctor. And finally, I'm a PhD student and my academic interest is medical wisdom, so practical wisdom, phronesis, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So Aidan has really nicely segued into what I wanted to talk about really, the virtues as split into moral virtues and intellectual virtues. So we spoke about trust, and within the moral virtues that are important in medicine, the Jubilee Centre has actually done some research about this in a report called Virtuous Medical Practice in 2015. And I'm sure this aligns with what you already know, but the moral virtues that are valued in medicine are kindness and compassion, honesty and fairness. They're the top three, along with other things that are very important like teamwork, altruism, perseverance and integrity. And I just wanted to say something about these things, because although we know they're important for doctors, we don't talk about them explicitly in medical education. And I'll give you an example. I was once teaching GP trainees, somebody who was about to qualify, and I was talking about virtues and values in medical practice, and I used the word integrity. And when I finished the talk, the young doctor came to me and said, "What is integrity?" And I felt disappointed that in her medical training, which was probably around 10 years at this point, nobody had ever had a conversation or given her examples or helped her talk through what integrity really is in medicine. So I think we need to be more explicit in training about talking about these moral virtues. And when we think about how medicine is regulated, it's the General Medical Council that every doctor is registered with in order to practice. Yet, with all these rule books that they have, no rule that says you must be kind actually leads to kindness, because kindness is something very internal. So a rule that says you must be kind is just an outside imposed thing. And what we really need to develop is the virtue, the sort of inside feelings, thoughts and values that motivate you to action. So those are the kind of moral virtues, but the challenges that we face in medicine is that medicine is very scientific in the way that preclinical medicine is taught. And that is a result of maybe Abraham Fleckner's review of medical education in 1910, where he reformed medical education in America, and that sort of perfused into medical education in this country. So if it's very scientific, it's based on things being black and white, and there's really no room for things like feelings, thoughts, and values. So this is one of the biggest challenges we face in trying to get conversations about character and virtue into curriculums. But let me just say something else about curriculums. Most values are actually learnt in the hidden curriculum, so not an explicit curriculum. So medical educators need to be really mindful about everything, not just what is officially taught, but about the whole learning environment and the organizations in which we learn and the culture, because they're really important as well when it comes to developing virtues. So my academic interest is actually in intellectual virtue. And interestingly, if you look at the way assessment has been driven and curriculums, they talk about knowledge, skills, and attitudes, and that's often how things are marked in medical exams. And I wonder if that is loosely mapped to Aristotelian terms of intellectual virtues. There are 5, but the 3 main ones that are quite relevant are episteme, which is scientific knowledge, techne, which is skills, and the third one is actually phronesis. So maybe the attitudes bit didn't translate as well to phronesis, practical wisdom. And what's special about practical wisdom is it's a meta virtue, and it adjudicates all the different sources of knowledge that we use. And that's not just guidelines, it includes things like intuition. And it allows it to adjudicate when values conflict. So for example, honesty, being honest with somebody, might conflict with the need to be kind to them. And we have multiple value conflicts going on at the same time, which makes medicine very complex. So phronesis helps us work things out. It gives us a tool, a process in which to navigate this difficulty. And I would like to be as hubristic as to suggest that medicine is much more complex now, probably, than it was in Aristotle's time. So there's a greater need now for phronesis than there was then, because of technologies, innovation, medication, etc. So when I was doing my literature review for my PhD, it came out that phronesis is actually critical in medicine. Yet I can honestly say, as a doctor who's practicing, very few people even know the word phronesis. So there is a need for us to become more competent in the virtue literacy in medicine. And that came out in the Jubilee Centre report as well. And essentially, phronesis is about doing the right thing at the right time for the right person for the right reason. It has moral underpinnings. So what I just finally want to sort of move on to is the connection between professionalism and phronesis. Now, some authors have actually used it synonymously, like Kinghorn and Hilton and Slotnick. But what's really important is people talk about, when it comes to professionalism, identity formation. And this is the same for character and virtue. It's about identity formation. Who are you going to be? What kind of a doctor you are going to be? It's about dealing with difficulty and complexity, both of those, professionalism and phronesis. And essentially, it's about what you ought to do rather than what you can do. And one of the biggest ideas that appeals to me regarding all this work on character and virtue in medicine, and especially phronesis, is when Aristotle first gave us these ideas, he said it is a route to flourishing. And I honestly believe we're in a climate now where not just patients need to flourish, but doctors need to flourish. So I do believe actually the place of character and virtue in medicine is central. Thank you.
Thanks, Sabena. That was incredibly insightful, and it's certainly prompted a couple of questions that I might take Chair's privilege to ask you when we turn to those. Moving straight on though, introducing our second speaker, Professor David Bogle is Pro-Vice Provost at the Doctoral School of UCL. David is an expert, studied chemical engineering at Imperial College at both undergraduate and graduate levels, and got his PhD in 1983. Since then, he's worked in practice, lectured in Australia, and joined UCL in 1990. Since then, since 2008, he's been the chair of the steering group of the LERU Doctoral Studies community. He's also been elected Fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering, and he's a member of the Engineering Council. Hand over now to Professor David Bogle to talk about the place of character in engineering.
Great, thanks so much, Aidan. I'm obviously here not in my role at UCL, but more as an engineer. And I've got some slides which I'm going to share with you if I can, which will explain some of the work that we've been up to. Share, let me press the right Can you see them okay? Yeah, great. So I was tasked a year or so ago to chair a group sponsored by the two organizations at the top there, the Engineering Council and the Royal Academy of Engineering. Royal Academy of Engineering, the most sort of senior engineering body, and the Engineering Council is, if you like, the sort of regulator in that sense of the engineering profession, such as we have one. And we have this reference group on engineering ethics, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing. You'll notice I have not used character and virtue, but those are sort of underpinning the way that we approach ethical behavior. And I'm sure Aidan and I have discussed the fact that some of the semantics here are important, but they can also get in the way a little bit. We don't use virtue and character very much in the engineering world. So a little bit about engineering. You know, we make lots of decisions all the time. Some of them are very small scale technical choices influencing safety, and some of them are major strategic decisions affecting the lives of millions, as it says there. You know, huge infrastructure projects, redesigning this, that, and the other for a country. So we focus a lot on technical competence, but there hasn't really been very much on ethical issues. And I certainly think, we think there's a lot of scope for it. But there's these ethical things come through in various different ways that we have gradually built more and more into the way we form and the way we operate. Is safety, ensuring safety, safe operations, sustainability, increasingly, and has been around, that's been around for quite a long time in the engineering world, but there's greater emphasis. Diversity, that's not so good in engineering, and it's something we're particularly concerned on, and now increasingly on ethics and ethical behavior, and in a sense, the character that's necessary to determine that. So just a couple of things that into context, I put this reference, the second line there, Chris Atkins quote here, seeking to create habit, custom and culture of ethical behavior within the engineering profession. And that's one of the things we're really trying to stress a little bit more. And in 2017, there was this statement of ethical principles that was really championed by the Engineering Council and the Royal Academy of Engineering. We'll come back to that in a minute, and employers really seeking to use that as well. And one of the reasons we were set up is we are broadly seen as a very trustworthy and broadly ethical profession. As you see down the bottom, 87% of public see engineers as trustworthy, which puts us third behind doctors and nurses, I'm pleased to say. But there's been a few things that caused us to reflect a little bit. The Grenfell disaster was an engineering problem and an ethical engineering problem. I think it will be fair. The Boeing 737 MAX disaster, where some things were raised but not acted on, and of course the Volkswagen diesel scandal, which was illegal, not just unethical, but quite a lot of other issues, climate change, how this influences what we do. Are we thinking about climate change in all those big decisions we do? Artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles, very hot areas at the moment, and of course bribery and corruption, which has been around forever, and so on and so forth. But and particularly why we were tasked to look at some of these big concerns, but also there's a lot of greater scrutiny on decisions, that big engineering decisions that are made, particularly through social media, and rightly so, that people are really looking at what we do and how we do it, and are we doing it in a good way. So we think it's important for us to be leading on this. So what would we think it looked like? We obviously want world-class with ethics embedded as culture, such that society can maintain its confidence and trust in the engineering profession. And we want all those in the engineering profession to act with honesty, integrity, respect for life, law, the environment and public good, accuracy and rigor in what we do, and leadership and communicating what we do, not just doing it, but telling people about it and involving people. Those are the 4 principles of that statement of ethical principles that I referred to on the previous page. So we want to ensure that public trust and awareness of the engineering profession, because to be honest, I think awareness of the engineering profession is probably quite low generally, but we want that to be high, and the UK to be recognised as having high ethical standards. So here's some things, I'm not going to go through this list, but here are some of the things that we would like to be stronger, that everybody, apprentices and students, really explore ethical decision making in their formation, and of course and then all practicing engineers think about it, have this culture of thinking ethically about what they do, and receiving training, and that people can raise their concerns and challenges. And I can say that, as you see at the bottom, health and safety changed very significantly in the 70s and 80s following some very significant disasters. So there's very strong health and safety culture within the engineering profession. Diversity is changing, it's taking its time, and we would like to see this ethical view more deeply embedded in the way that people think. It's there and it's often, but as somebody was saying, there's lots of what was Sabena's comment, value conflicts that we have very strongly in engineering between, for example, environmental performance, safe operations, the health and safety of people, and profitability. Those are very often in conflict. So here's the sort of actions that we're putting forward to the engineering profession as a bit of a it's a whole series of actions under these sort of lines, that greater engagement, so that we promoting debate, not just solving these problems, but involving everybody in the problems that in the solutions that we're putting forward. A more consistent, coherent approach to education. And here I very much echo what Sabena was saying. The engineering trainers, the engineering educators have been trained very much in teaching people how to solve problems and what to perhaps think about the solution to those problems. They're not very good at open value judgments within complex situations. And so there's quite a bit of stuff to do there. Maximizing the adoption of these professional values in the regulatory processes that we have. Thinking ethics before action, thinking so that our character in that sense and the virtue that we might have will bring us to think not just I can meet these standards, but how can I do better? How can I really improve things? And then foster this debate of culture and openness and calling out bad practice. And then that, of course, was the problem with Volkswagen. They didn't call out bad practice. In fact, probably all those major things. Somebody was saying it somewhere, but they weren't listened to. And that's also something about diversity of views. So just a few of the challenges that we have, and this might be interesting across the various professions that we're talking about. The responsibility then is often at the organization or company level rather than the individual. And yet most of our codes and the way we think about things is how the individual behaves. So how does that link between the individual and the organization that they're working for? And who's actually got responsible at the end of the day? Engineering is a very international profession, so there are different standards around the world. So we have to be thinking about that. We have this problem, only a small percentage of UK engineers are members of professional societies. It's not a regulated profession in the same way that medicine is. So how can we ensure that the whole of the engineering profession is really brought into this way of thinking? Well, of course, we can do that through education and training, but it needs to be reinforced through professional practice. And then there's something, this is a very technical point about, there's legal measures and professional sanctions for poor behavior. I don't really want to go into that one, but there is an issue about, is there something in between those things? And this last one maybe also resonate as well. This is not only about engineering. We engineers, we are involved with the public, with other stakeholders in the big decisions that we make. Insurers turns out to be a big issue. Often insurers say, you mustn't say anything about this because it will invalidate your insurance. So that puts a real dampener. And how can that be an ethical way of doing things? And how do we get over that sort of problem? So there are quite a lot of other stakeholders involved not in our profession because of the decisions that we making. And that, I think, is probably similar between all the professions. It's not just our profession, it's our profession, how it links with other stakeholders, the public, and so on in general. So I will stop there and hope that generates some discussion and some points for discussion.
Very much so. Thank you, David. Found that really interesting, some of the stark differences, not just in terms of use of language of character and virtue or not between the two professions. Turning to our third speaker, Major Dr. Scott Parsons. Scott is the character development integrator for the military program at the US Military Academy at West Point in New York State. He is also an assistant professor of philosophy and ethics. Scott is a recently retired US Army military intelligence officer who served strategically, operationally, and tactically for over 20 years, including multiple tours to Iraq and Afghanistan. Scott very recently passed his PhD through the Jubilee Centre at the University of Birmingham, to which we afford him many congratulations. But hand over now to Scott to talk about the place of character and virtue in the military, and in particular in the US military. Scott.
Good evening to those of you in the UK, and good morning and good afternoon to those of you in the US. I'd like to thank Aidan and Rebecca and the rest of the Jubilee Center for the opportunity to be part of today's panel and discuss virtue and character in the professions. I'd also like to thank Sabena and David for their discussion of character and virtue in their respective professions. As an employee of the United States government, I need to express that what I say today are my own views and thoughts and not that of West Point or the Army or the United States government. But like law, business, nursing, teaching, who have specific professions, soldiers too have a profession, often referred to as the profession of arms. Like other professions, the military realizes the importance of both competence and character, and the importance of character development within the profession of arms, albeit within the narrow lens of the United States Military Academy at West Point. And that's what I would like to discuss with you today. In my discussion, I'm going to start more broadly with the Army and quickly narrow it down to West Point. The size of the US military is roughly 1.3 million strong. This includes 6 branches of service, to include the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, and the newest branch you might have heard of, Space Force. The 1.3 million also include 3 components, which are active duty, reserve, and National Guard components. The largest branch of services is the Army, with just under 500,000 soldiers, and that is approximately 35% of the US military, with the Navy and Air Force coming in at about 24% each, and the Marine Corps about 14%, the Coast Guard at 2%, and the Space Force just under 1%. Now, the military is also broken down into enlisted and officer ranks, and the enlisted ranks make up slightly over 80% of the officer corps, and with the officer corps coming in just under 20%. Now, when it comes to commissioning people into the officer corps, the Army itself commissions more than 6,000 officers every year. And there are 3 commissioning sources. There's the United States Military Academy at West Point, the Reserve Officer Training Corps, often referred to as ROTC, its initials, and also Officer Candidate School, which refers to often as OCS. Now, West Point maintains a 4,000 strong corps of cadets, and approximately 1,000 cadets graduate and commission each year. And ROTC takes the bulk of this. They have about 1,000 universities in the US and commission about 70% of the new Army officers each year, with OCS and West Point commissioning about the same number, somewhere around 15%. Now, the way that the 3 commissioning sources work are interestingly different. OCS is a 12-week, 7-day-a-week intensive training course based at Fort Benning, Georgia, focused on leadership and military training. Now, ROTC runs the length of a 4-year undergraduate program at affiliate universities, and the cadets in ROTC take a military science class each semester in addition to their chosen field of academic study. Now, additionally, for 2 summers, they spend 4 weeks each at a military camp learning leadership and military tactics. Now, the United States Military Academy is a 47-month experience that provides graduates a commission in the Army, as well as a Bachelor of Science degree in a variety of topics. It combines leadership and military instruction and with physical training and academic instruction. The U.S. Military Academy at West Point's mission is to educate, train, and inspire the Corps of Cadets so that each graduate is a commissioned leader of character, committed to the values of duty, honor, country, and prepare for a career of professional excellence and service to the nation as an officer in the United States Army. Now, when it comes to West Point, the Academy is an interesting cross-section of the military profession as well as higher education, character and virtue, and the meta virtue of phronesis that Sabena so eloquently described to you earlier, referenced within the military, medical profession, are also important within both higher ed and the profession of arms. As it relates to character education and character development within higher education and the military profession, in 2019, West Point Superintendent, Lieutenant General Darrell A. Williams, stood up an ad hoc committee to look into the best way to develop character at West Point. And this ad hoc committee made several recommendations, and two of which I'd like to share with you today. The ad hoc committee began to do research into character education and character development programs and frameworks. The committee quite quickly found that the Jubilee Center's framework for character education was an essential component of a character education program. And the committee recommended to the superintendent that West Point adopt the Jubilee Center's framework to include the Neo-Aristotelian-based building blocks of character, which is a 4-domain model of virtue that includes intellectual, moral, civic, and performance virtues. Now, the committee also recommended a profession-specific domain that they labeled as martial or military virtues. Now, these virtues fit under the other 4 domains of virtue, and they are crucial and important to flourishing, but specific to that within the military profession. Now, additionally, the Jubilee Center's framework included the components of virtue, which are virtue perception, virtue knowledge and understanding, virtue emotion, virtue identity, virtue motivation, virtue reasoning, and virtue action and practice. A key aggregation of those components is virtue literacy, which consists of 3 interrelated components of virtue perception, virtue knowledge and understanding, and virtue reasoning. The second important recommendation the committee made to the superintendent was to establish a character integration advisory group that would be an organization at West Point that would be charged with helping integrate the character education framework into all the programs at West Point. And these included the academic, the military, and the physical programs. The superintendent accepted the recommendations of the committee, and the character integration advisory group was formed in 2020. As a character development integrator for the military program within that organization, an important component of my job is to integrate the character framework into the summer military training that cadets receive. Cadets participate in military training each summer, with underclass cadets receiving the military training and upperclass cadets giving the training. Each summer, the cadets that will be first-year cadets arrive for cadet basic training, affectionately referred to as BEAST. And I guess this is because it's such a pleasant experience. My first project is focusing on these incoming new cadets. The project is a character journal that is based on the character journal developed by the Jubilee Center for their teacher training workshop in 2018, with Michael Fullard doing the lion's share of the work. Now, the character journal is a way to not only introduce the character framework to the new cadets, but also to help develop their virtue literacy. Recently, the Jubilee Center, in conjunction with the Oxford Character Project, have published Character Education in Universities, a framework for flourishing. Now, in this framework, the Jubilee Center and the Oxford Character Project discuss how to cultivate character in higher education. They maintain 7 methods of character development that can be applied in the university setting. They are habituation through practice, reflection on personal experience, engagement with virtuous exemplars, dialogue that increases virtue literacy, conversations about situational variables, moral reminders that make norms salient, and lastly, friendships of mutual accountability. Now, these 7 strategies were developed by Michael Lamb, Jonathan Brent, and Ed Brooks, and discussed in detail in their paper, How is Virtue Cultivated? 7 Strategies for Postgraduate Character Development, which was published in the Journal of Character Education earlier this year. You can also get access to that paper on the Oxford Character Project website, and I encourage you to do so. The reason that I mention these strategies is that of Lamb, Brent, and Brooks' 7 character development strategies, the character journal utilizes 3: habituation through practice, reflection on personal experience, and awareness of situational variables. Additionally, the idea is that the weekly discussions are also incorporated into part of the character journal curriculum, which results in 2 more strategies being engaged: dialogue that increases virtue literacy, and the opportunity to introduce moral reminders. Now, moral reminders bring our attention to the ethical obligations that we hold, which makes it more difficult for us to justify breaking our moral promises. Further, if new cadets in BEAST are paired into groups of 2 or 3 as part of the discussion, the strategy of friendships and mutual accountability can be employed. Finally, deliberately incorporating and discussing the virtues of people with whom the students admire and respect utilizes a strategy of engagement with virtuous exemplars. Further, we plan to assess the new cadets' virtue literacy this summer through a very short pre and post survey on character and virtue. Now, the Character Integration Advisory Group will continue to integrate our Jubilee Center-based character education framework across all of the programs. Next summer, we will begin to integrate the framework into the other summer training programs that support West Point's mission of educating, training, and inspiring the Corps of Cadets so that each graduate is a commissioned leader of character. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Scott. Thank you to all three of our speakers for three very different, but three very interesting and certainly thought-provoking talks. What we can do now, I've picked up a couple of the questions that have been posted already, but I would encourage anybody that would like to ask a question to any one, two, or three of our speakers to use the chat function to post it there, and I will ask it on your behalf. Turning first then to try and capture some of the conversation that's gone on in the chat, trying to summarize some of what Brian Jennings has begun to ask. Thank you very much, Brian. But then some of the responses both from Sabena and from David so far. And does this come down to something that David pointed to around semantics in the language of character? So David spoke in the engineering profession about not using the terms character and virtue all that often, but then referenced the number of virtues that are important to the engineering profession, certainly in terms of ethical practice. Where we've in the Jubilee Centre engaged with different audiences over the years, we've encountered that very much, that maybe the term character or the term virtue is less well used or less well understood, but that doesn't mean that it isn't important. Once you provide that language, people feel more comfortable using it, or certainly you can begin to share experiences and share language a little bit more. Can I ask each of you then, and maybe in the order that you spoke, so maybe Sabena first, is the language of character important in order for it to be consistent across professions, or is it something that can be profession specific?
I feel it can be profession specific. You know, medicine has plenty of Latin words that nobody understands, so we don't need a whole bunch of new Greek words that nobody understands. I think it's really important to bring people with me and leaders in character education on this journey. So to have words that immediately put people off is not constructive. I do believe these words are important and valuable and capture something that maybe our normal vocabulary doesn't capture. But I found in my journey of doing my PhD that I have had to do a bit of a translation exercise from a lot of the virtue ethics books and the Greek terminology that I've read to standing there in front of jobbing doctors that want to grasp something quite quickly. I once did a conference for GP trainers, and I remember the feedback at the end of the day was they said it was quite intellectually intense. Now, these are doctors that can memorize whole heaps of things, but they found me talking about the concepts of virtue ethics and character and wisdom difficult. But so we have to make it graspable for them to run with it, because that's what we need for this to take off. So I do believe we do need to amend some of the terminology so that people can grasp and go with it. And I think that can be different for different professions.
Thanks, Sabena. David?
So I would absolutely agree with that. There is a space for, let's call it technical terms in a research institute and a discussion like this, absolutely. And but then how those things flow out and make impact and make influence the professions in this case, you then have to modulate and translate that language into something that's is going to bring people with you. Engineering is a very practical profession. It's full of very practical people, very smart, but sometimes don't go well with such terms of such value judgment terms. You know, virtue is a very sort of, it's more of a value judgment of somebody. And I think a lot of engineers feel a little bit uncomfortable for good or bad reason, not everybody, but you know, that you just have to, as Sabena said, you know, it depends on the culture of the formation and the type of people that are in there. Having said that, there is a point, and we might come to this, about when this virtue, and I was thinking, what is I think there's a difference between an attribute and a skill. An attribute is something you have, A skill is something you develop. So is virtue something you just have, or is it something that you can develop? Ethical behaviors, I think, can be developed by awareness and so on and so forth. A complete, having, well, we've heard from Scott about character formation, clearly can be developed. So you can develop some of these attributes, but there are some innate things that are quite hard to shift as well. So it's not black and white between attribute and skill, as I put it. There's something in between, but there are some that are more developable than others, I would say.
Thanks, David. Scott.
Yeah, I think the great thing about the Jubilee framework is just that. It's a framework, right? So it's something for us, for different professions to use. It's kind of a template, right? And so that you can project the things that are important to your profession. Things that are important to bankers are not going to be quite as important to doctors, and for doctors to engineers, and engineers necessarily to, say, infantry officers or armor officers fighting in battle. So it's something that the Jubilee Centre came up with that really is applicable to any profession, and you use it in the best way you can as a tool to help you with your character development exercises. One of the things I found that's really kind of important to use is this idea of a lexicon, right, or a common language, and Sabena kind of referenced that, right? We have been using words for a long time in the Army, such as loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, courage, these kind of things, right? And these are very clearly virtues, and we'll find them in the framework, even within the what I refer to as the martial virtues. You'll see these there. And so it's important that you reference these within your professions, but it's also important, as both David and Sabena mentioned, is to not sling around a bunch of Greek words because you're going to turn, cadets off in our case, and obviously senior officers as well. So it's really important to make it your own, but use this as a framework to help you develop character.
Thanks, Scott. Interpreting a little bit of the conversation in the chat said, to turn it into this question for each of you. Maybe if we turn to Scott first on this one. Is ethical practice best embedded implicitly or explicitly across professions, or particularly to your profession?
Can you say that last part again, Aidan? I'm sorry.
Is ethical practice best embedded or even rewarded implicitly or explicitly across professions generally, or particular to the military in your experience?
Well, I would say that I think that it's both, right? So it's that you have, many professions have a code of conduct, if you will, right? And that isn't necessarily virtue language or virtuous per se. It might be what they value or find important. For a long time, we've had something called the 7 Army values, and they're important to our profession. And now we have this framework we're developing at West Point, and hopefully one day it'll spread through the Army, through other commissioning sources, through enlisted schools for enlisted soldiers. But it's really kind of both. So you have this idea of a stated code of ethics or a framework, right, that everyone can see. You have it on a poster, it's put in different places. But also it's this idea of going through life and experiencing life in the profession or within, say, the academy. And it goes back to the whole Jubilee Centre idea of caught, taught, and sought, right? So you intentionally set it so that people catch it, that it's taught to them, and also that it's there for them to find for themselves. And that's I see it as both, honestly.
Thanks, Scott. Sabena.
I agree with Scott that it has to be both, but there is something really quite important about the practice of medicine, and that is we're dealing with people often at the most vulnerable points in their lives. And there is this inherently moral duty that you have to them. And that trust means, I would say, so much more. It's almost a huge responsibility for that doctor. And I think I know doctors that just practice according to the rules. Now that protects them to a degree, but they often don't get the whole satisfaction of the whole doctor interacting with the whole patient in quite an intimate and personal way. And that is also the way you often get the reward in medicine, because of a therapeutic relationship, a healing relationship, not just a treating relationship, a healing relationship. So there's something really quite important about you have to open yourself up and even make yourself vulnerable as a doctor to build some of those relationships. but that is within the framework of not overstepping boundaries and things like that, which is what the regulators and the GMC have guidance on. And just a quick example, actually, I think part of our professional development and our professional identity involves boundaries, healthy boundaries. And when I looked at what guidance is out there for doctors on boundaries, the only thing that was out there was don't have sexual relations with patients. I thought that is so one end of the spectrum of boundaries. But there's so much more we could talk about regarding boundaries and being a doctor. So yeah, I do think it's both, but I think what is underemphasized, under-discussed, under-taught is the sort of implicit aspect.
Thanks, Sabena. David.
So that's very interesting. Likewise, it's sort of both. I would have said in the engineering world, it tends to be much more implicit than explicit, and I would like it to be more explicit so that some of these things are actually talked about. They are talked about between somebody and their boss in sort of appraisals, for example. They might start to skirt around some of these things, but mostly because it's we don't have that personal relationship in the same way that Sabena described with that a medical practitioner does. The satisfaction comes from seeing the job done, seeing the bridge built, or whatever it might be. And so and that sometimes means they're cutting corners to get it done, when in fact what one might be wanting to do is to say, actually, we can do it better than this, but it might take a little bit longer. And we'd like to see those conversations be a little bit more. And those things, the tone comes very much from the top of the organization. You will see, corporate responsibility statements in major corporations that are supposed to be cascaded down and set the tone for the whole organization, and some work better than others. That's where it's explicit, but the chain down the cascading of that mindset doesn't always cascade right down to the everyday decisions that engineers might be making on particular projects. And we would like it to be so that there was a clear line right the way through. I often hear, I was talking to a neighbor once who said that their whole ethical tone of their company changed completely when they were bought out by different management, and the management changed, and the whole thing changed completely, and the whole way that they had to operate as an organization changed. That's rather uncomfortable if you have a particular set of virtues that you want to sustain, and yet somehow the system needs to be able to enable and empower people to do more than just the minimum.
Thanks, David. Question directly for Scott from your former PhD supervisor, Christian Christensen. Since the Jubilee Centre framework that you referenced very heavily there was originally intended and developed for pre-university education, indeed it was explicitly for teachers in schools in England and Wales, do you still feel that it resonates with university students? And if so, have you needed to adapt it at all in order to differentiate it for use at a higher level?
No, that's a really great question from Christian. So basically, I think it's interesting that it was designed for primary and secondary schools, but so much of it resonates not just with higher education, which is what we're trying to use it for, but it also really within professions. I think a lot of what is there can be used in a variety of professions. So I think it's quite useful. And as I kind of alluded to earlier, it's really kind of, for me, the way I see it is a kind of a loose framework to use. Now, when the Jubilee Centre and the Oxford Character Project came up with the new specific framework for higher ed, and it's a little more refined and a little more targeted toward higher education, it provides a few more ways and strategies on how to specifically integrate character into curriculum in higher ed. That is a more refined product. But like I said, that framework is beautiful. It's just a really great thing that you guys came up with, Aidan, and it can be used in a variety of contexts, and higher ed and the military profession are definitely two good examples of that.
Thanks, Scott. A question from Yasmin. There is a suggestion in psychology that when we incentivize behaviors or people feel they are externally controlled, and it can be harder to have intrinsic motivation for that said behavior. On the one hand, It seems that systems that don't incentivize us to focus on character result in less emphasis being placed on character. Then on the other hand, is there a danger of us not having intrinsic motivation for character growth if we measure it, incentivize it, etc., etc.? To ask for your comments on that, if we turn to David first.
Tricky one. I don't think so. I think if you incentivize people, that's what they will focus on. That's the nature of reward, most of the reward systems we have. So I don't think by making it more explicit, as we talked about before, I think it would incentivize more. I think implicit is this, that no, I think it would, and it also allows people, if it's more clearly incentivized, it allows people to be more proud of the good, the virtuous behaviors that they might have. Whereas if it wasn't explicit, as we know, people do tend to hide some of these things. They don't want to be seen to be, you know, the good guy, as it were, necessarily, and to be so. I don't think that is a problem, personally.
Thanks, David. Sabena.
In Schwartz and Sharp's book, Practical Wisdom, good book. Okay. They talk about the will and the skill, and they say that incentives undermine the will and rules undermine the skill. And there's a lot of truth. It really resonates, and I've seen this actually in practice with regard to if you start paying people for marking papers, then if you ask them to do a favour and mark a few extra papers, they won't do it without payment. There's also a really good example in the book, I think, and it's about a nursery where children were being collected late, so they started administering a charge, but then they realised that the parents were paying the charge and the staff were still not getting home on time. So it didn't really solve the problem of staff getting home on time. So they withdrew the charge, but then people lost the moral sort of imperative to collect their children on time because they brought in this incentive. So that was a really interesting anecdote about incentives. I honestly believe that people have motivation for something in life. Maybe they don't know what it is right now. And we need to help them explore where their internal motivation is. And it might not actually be in the course that they're doing or in the profession that they're in. And that's why you're kind of swimming against the tide. And as educators, I do think we have to help people find out where their motivation lies. And I think if you follow that path, often you find things a lot easier and you get to that state of flow that Csikszentmihalyi talks about, and you are more likely to flourish.
Thanks, Sabena. Scott.
You know, I think it's interesting that, you know, people like John Doerr, situationists, that say it's not about your, you know, who you are as a person or your character. It's about the situation you find yourself in, and almost anyone will act a certain way depending on the situation there. And I think really there's kind of this interesting hybrid of both. I'm not sure how we can assess this, or if we can test this to find out what percentage of someone's moral action is related to the situation or to their character or their personality. There's some kind of mix in there, right? And there's certain things that we find quite easy to do morally correct, and other things that are a challenge for us as individuals. And so if we're talking about developing a profession or a group of people in this way, I think that you do, incentive for me might not be the right word. You might want to put things in place to help reinforce the kind of good virtuous behavior that you're trying to help develop and instill in these people in this profession. So it's this kind of nice balance. And again, it refers back to that phrase that you guys came up with of caught, taught, and sought. And so I would say that it's really kind of an interesting mix of the two, although I don't disagree with Sabena's kind of assessment of incentives can, in many cases, not work or help you to morally reason or moral act.
Thanks, Scott. Just ask one final question to each of you. So from Kate Toms, thank you for your question, Kate. So the methods or tools used for developing virtue that Scott mentioned explicitly, but also that many of us may be familiar with, including reflection, exemplars, friendship of accountability, and so on. Kate's asking, well, they're all admirable and useful. However, is there a problem of subjectivity? Therefore, is it possible to get virtue wrong? And the example that she gives is that a group of friends could mistakenly encourage rashness rather than courage between peers, but their mistake becomes a self or group reinforcing issue. How might we correct this in terms of looking for the golden mean rather than subjectivity in terms of virtue identification? Maybe we turn to Sabena first regarding that one.
You've given me a juicy one, haven't you? Okay, well, I think for me, talking about virtue in medicine, I think one of the most important things is context. And if we're talking about context, one of the most important supportive mechanisms for that is the ability to, in a safe space, have a conversation with a senior, a supervisor, or a peer about grey areas, about complexity. And because we're talking about a profession, not just sort of really general virtue, we're talking about professional virtues, I think there is some consensus about what should happen in a particular circumstance. But even then, there are contextual nuances that will make one case different from another case. And even in law, I believe if some doctors agree on a path, it stands in a court of law. I think it's called the Bogle principle. So this discussion in a safe space is so important. And one thing that I've noticed in the whole of medical education actually is this, and maybe it's stemmed from the way that they're assessed. So when you have to do a multiple choice and you have to answer true or false, you have to commit to an answer, and actually you fear being wrong. Whereas when we're talking about developing phronesis and character and virtue, we need to not fear being wrong, because being wrong means we have to explore what the possibilities are, and we grow and we develop things like our phronesis, our wisdom, through these supported conversations.
Thanks, Sabena. David.
I certainly recognise this point about the possibility of what you call rashness, where somebody is going, what certainly somebody might see as inappropriate ways of doing things. And we certainly see those sorts of things. But the point I was going to make is exactly the same point Sabena made. It's about context. Not always, it's often about context. There isn't necessarily always a single answer, a single best answer, a single most virtuous answer, because it will depend. I have to chair a complaints panel sometimes between students and their supervisors, and it's extraordinary how you hear the two sides and you think, are they talking about the same thing here? People they feel they're in the right, they've done the right thing, and then you hear the other side, and they're just only seeing part of the story. So there's something then about how to see the bigger system, to be able to rise above the local, what you can see. And that's where the conversations are so important, and the training here about listening to other people and diverse views can make such a big difference to come to an agreement on what the best outcome should be.
Thanks, David. Scott, to give you the final word.
Okay. So I don't disagree with Sabena and David. I think, from a neo-Aristotelian kind of conception of this, the virtuous action is dependent on a lot of things. It's the right amount in the right way at the right time in the right context. It's all those things are important. Now, I want to thank Kate for that question. It was really interesting and thought-provoking. One of the things she pointed out is, do we want to just let the cadets just go out and teach themselves? And the answer is clearly not. There needs to be a process, and there needs to be an understanding of this and learning the right way. And there's ways to go about doing that. So yes, there needs to be, she used a reference of moral exemplars. We do need those individuals there helping, guiding the process, so that ultimately we can choose the right amount of that character trait in that situation in that time. And yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Scott. Right, we are ever so slightly past 7 o'clock, so apologies for not keeping strictly to time, but thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you, I hope you don't mind me thanking on your behalf the three speakers, Dr. Sabena Jameel, Professor David Bogle, and Major Dr. Scott Parsons, for three incredibly different but also very thought-provoking and interesting presentations. There's a number of issues that we didn't get to, such as codes of conduct versus virtuous practice, and bottom-up and top-down approaches to moderating virtuous practice in each of the professions. But thank you so much for your time. I hope you've enjoyed it. We have recorded it, so it will appear on the Jubilee Centre's website at some point in the next few working days. And I would just like to point out that we do have another webinar coming up next week. They're quick and fast at the moment. We've got one on Tuesday, which is looking at youth social action. We have some very interesting speakers there, which is on Tuesday evening, UK time. But thank you again, and I wish you all a very pleasant evening.